is we're starting in chapter 4, and he is entitled The Antisupernaturalism as an Authenticity Criterion.
Well, that's a mouthful.
Yeah. So against the supernaturalism. So the things that are not natural, right?
Right.
And so what does the early period of history look like? And so he starts out here in chapter 4 saying, in both the early Christian period and the modern period, miracle claims have boasted significant detractors. Probably a big thing. You say someone's been raised from the dead. Not only do we read about it in the New Testament and seen it as a source of contention, but if you say that today with any of your friends, you might get a few scoffs as well. So usually dead men stay dead. And so when you say something that happens not naturally, you have to provide proof for it. You have to kind of bolster the claim that something not natural has taken place. For much of history, such detractors were sometimes critical of unfounded claims without ruling out the possibility of genuine supernatural activity. Since the argument of David Hume, however, much of the modern academia has a priori ruled out claims of direct supernatural activity in the natural world. Meaning, well, we all know these outlandish claims of miracles and supernatural things occurring, the gods doing one thing, or people rising from the dead, or crops growing within a matter of seconds. These things cannot and don't happen. Therefore, we can just look back at all those stories and just realize everyone's kind of believed a myth, and we can just dismiss them out of hand without much claim. Now let's figure out how Hannibal crossed the Alps with some more elephants. That one is okay to believe, but people turning water to wine cannot happen. So that's what we want to do here.
And so he says, however, because many of the foundations of Hume's argument no longer fit our contemporary philosophic and scientific context, many scholars, he says, have begun to question the Humean paradigm, right? And so, and he's going to do this now in the next chapter, I believe, when we get to it, but we're kind of working our way up to that. So he says many of Hume's contemporaries recognize the circularity of his foundational arguments, even in his own day. And so in the next few chapters, he's going to first introduce discussion about anti-supernatural assumptions as an to authenticate the criteria in terms of New Testament scholars. In other words, if, the claim would be something like this. If there is a claim of supernatural, then that can't be authentic claim. That's the idea here, right? And so he's going to look at this idea, and that basically comes as a result of Hume's critique. He says, then he'll trace briefly some of Hume's objections to miracles and counter objections raised against his arguments, and briefly argue that Hume's case provides an inadequate basis for a priori ruling out the possibility of supernatural activity. So notice Hume, in his arguments, as we'll see, kind of suggests he's not really trying to a priori ruling out. He's kind of suggesting that the probability of miracles are so small that they, aren't credible. But what Keener here is suggesting here is that based on Hume's arguments, now we have, even before you examine the evidence, you rule out the possibility of a miracle. That's a priori ruling out the possibility of supernatural activity. And he's going to suggest, as historians, do we really want to go there? That's more not history, but philosophy, and it's based on a particular worldview, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what he's going to question here. And part of as we go along, he won't get to all of that in this particular section, but we'll see he'll begin to question that as we go.
Right. So we're going to look before the time of Hume, during the time of Hume, and even a little bit after the time of Hume as well. So it turned out to be quite an interesting chapter here. Well, this chapter provides a historical prolegomena for the next two chapters, which questions the dogmatic anti-supernaturalism that most modern academia has inherited from Hume and others. So just be skeptical of all these claims. Don't worry about it. It might have fed into the society at the times, but we know that it couldn't have happened. Therefore, we can just dismiss them out of hand and they can just fade into the background of hobbits and wizards and dragons, because we know those things don't also exist, all except for the dragons there. Well, it is in those chapters that he'll address in greater details the anti-miraculous approach that developed in the radical Enlightenment. And it's always nice to see people kind of poo-poo the Enlightenment a bit more these days. So I'm excited for that as well. But here he'll survey instead especially some classical standards of thought on which some Enlightenment thinkers drew. And then he'll join other voices in emphasizing that we have frequently embraced anti-supernaturalism as simply an automatic, unexamined assumption, and will note that it, too, reflects a specific cultural setting, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, good.